Recently, Bloomberg covered a research article that was published in June of 2022 from Brown University, and it was an observational study that showed a strong association between people who consume fish with skin cancer. And I wanted to address this because a lot of people would then ask, do you recommend me eating fish? And should I stop eating fish? I'm scared of skin cancer. And that's what this video is all about. If you want to find out more about skin cancer, fish, I'll link resources down in the description box below, as well as the original articles, the research papers, and other relevant information. So do check them out if you want to. So let's talk about this study very quickly. So this study was published in the Springer Journal from Brown University, published on June 2022. It had a population of approximately 367 participants in the NIH AARP Diet and Health Study, and they were aged 50 to 71 across different states in the United States. Now, their baseline dietary intake was assessed using a food frequency questionnaire. It's basically a questionnaire where a researcher would ask you, do you consume this? Do you consume that? Is it this amount? This pictures here, does it show the right amount? And so on and so forth. They measured total fish intake by the sum of fried fish intake, non-fried fish intake, and tuna intake, specifically canned tuna. Now, after about 15 years, this study ended on the 31st of December 2011. Participants were followed and tracked whether they unfortunately met their final days or whether they had cancer using state registries as well. Bear in mind that things like age, sex, BMI, smoking status, race, education status, physical activity, family history of cancer, ultraviolet radiation exposure or UVR, alcohol drinking, caffeine intake, and daily caloric intake was also taken into the models. So what did the researchers find? After adjusting for all these known melanoma risk factors or skin cancer risk factors, they observed a positive association between total fish intake, more than 2 per week, with the risk of skin cancer. And except for fried fish, these people had a higher likelihood of developing skin cancer. So let me summarize very quickly once more. It's an observational study, which means I didn't intervene. It was just observation. Of about 491,000 people aged 50 to 71, we tracked their diet from the beginning, and that's it. And after 15 years, we see what happened to them. And we found significant associations between higher consumption of fish, more than 2 per week, with skin cancer after adjustments for certain risk factors. Now, knowing this study, should you stop eating fish? Absolutely not, and here's why. While there was a significant risk associated with those people who ate fish and skin cancer, this study showed an association and not necessarily a causality. In other words, it does not imply that eating fish will directly cause skin cancer. Now, the authors did speculate reasons why this may be the case, and they suggested contaminants, things like PCBs, biphenyls, arsenic, mercury, that are actually, by studies and research, shown to have actually been increased in the fish that we eat since the 1970s to today by approximately 130%. But bear in mind, this is merely hypothetical, and there haven't been any research articles in human, alright, that showed this same causality. It's only been theorized. Either that or it's been shown in animal studies at best. So let's talk about the limitations of this study. Now, the authors did cite some of the limitations in question. For one, they cited that associations were detected in their cohort. Does not imply causality, we've talked about that. But they also mentioned that the food frequency questionnaire or the dietary assessment was only assessed, number one, at baseline, meaning only at the start of the study. Changes could have happened throughout that 15 years, and those changes could be significant in causing skin cancer. A lot of people are recalling things from memory, and obviously those are not necessarily the most accurate. The other thing that the authors also cited was the fact that UVR or ultraviolet radiation exposure was only calculated for each participant based on their residence at baseline, at the start of the study. How that changed over 15 years, we don't know. Now, beyond the authors, myself, other researchers in public comments have also mentioned things like, only fried fish, non-fried fish, and canned tuna was measured as fish intake. We now know that different fish, whether big, small, medium, have different contaminant levels, and depending on how it's processed, can also impact its final association. We know, for example, in Cantonese culture, where you have a lot of salted fish intake, that is more likely, more probable to be carcinogenic compared to fresh fish. Now, the other important metric was the fact that biologic level of contaminants, those contaminants that the authors suspected, they were not measured at all. meaning to say that within the participants itself, upon the point of diagnosis of skin cancer, how much contaminants were actually present within the participant's body itself. And we can measure this either through plasma, blood samples, and other biological assays. The other thing about these contaminants is the fact that they are labeled probable carcinogens, and its full mechanisms in humans are still unknown. The other thing, and I'm going to end on this note for the limitations, is the fact that one of the epidemiological studies, large observational study, quoted within this paper itself, while also showing case for contaminants with skin cancer, it also showed that fish consumption with benefits of omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, actually had a protective association against melanoma. 80% lower risk. The other thing I want to talk about is the fact that fish is inherently good for you. We know for a fact that fish is a good source of protein, vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, and many other nutrients. We know that in different human populations, whether it's the Inuits, the Japanese, its consumption has been associated with a lot of positive outcomes: lower risk of cardiovascular disease, depression, metabolic syndrome, hyperinsulinemia, glucose intolerance, hypertension, and even all-cause mortality. I've mentioned the Inuits and Japanese, and those are people who consume a lot of fish, and they have one of the best longevity lifespan. So, what do I think and what should you do? Ultimately, simply put, eat fish. 2 to 5 servings per week is still a good recommendation, and you can mix between oily fish like salmon, tuna. Locally here in Malaysia, you have tenggiri, tongkol, white fish like snapper, haddock, whiting, pollock. These are all perfectly fish to consume every now and then. The other thing about the fish is contaminants, right? And I think most people are concerned about this, and to combat this, simple things you can do is opt for smaller and locally sourced fish. If you know it's sustainably sourced, if you know the fish conditions, even better. What I'm trying to say here is that bigger fish with a bigger lifespan, they tend to have more exposure opportunities to bioaccumulate all these contaminants. And so if you go for more smaller fish, more well-sourced fish, the chances of contaminants to be there in the first place will be quite low. And if you cycle them through different varieties of fish, you will also give your body enough time to not bioaccumulate and wash out those contaminants in question as well. I want to end on this note, and the fact is, this study is actually a very well done study, and frankly, its findings are quite serious and we need to investigate further. But personally, I do not think fish consumption and its contaminants will lead to skin cancer unless you are eating like 5 servings of fish a day. Okay, maybe then. But I'm willing to bet this. I'm willing to bet that ultraviolet radiation exposure coupled with lifestyle choices, things like how often do you love go tanning? We know that kind of exposure is concerning. How often do you use sunscreen? Processed food consumptions, processed fish for that matter, and smoking would probably play a much bigger role, as some other studies are starting to point towards to, for skin cancer than just eating fresh fish. So those are my thoughts. If you are concerned, please let me know in the comment section below. If you have a question, ask away and I'll try my best to answer it for you. But ultimately, please, I will eat fish, and I hope you do too. And that's all for this time. I'll see you soon. Bye.